September 22, 1984, and the MS Pacific Star sailed through calm waters approximately 400 miles southwest of Los Angeles, carrying 1,200 passengers on a 7-day cruise from San Francisco to Mexico and back. The ship was a luxury vessel with 11 decks, multiple restaurants and entertainment venues, and expansive outdoor spaces where passengers gathered to enjoy the mild September evening and watch stars appear over the dark Pacific. Ryan Dalton was 32 years old, a successful real estate developer from Seattle with sandy blonde hair, an athletic build, and an easy smile that made him popular among the other passengers he'd met during the cruise. His younger brother Evan was 28, a freelance photographer with darker hair worn longer than his brother's, a more reserved personality, and a passion for capturing sunrise and sunset photos from the ship's various decks. The brothers had booked the cruise to celebrate Ryan's recent engagement and to spend quality time together before Ryan's upcoming wedding, and they'd been enjoying the week of relaxation away from their busy professional lives. Saturday evening, September 22nd, featured a starlight gala on the promenade deck, with live music, dancing, and an elaborate buffet, and most passengers attended the festivities that began at 8 p.m. Ryan and Evan had dinner with other passengers they'd befriended during the cruise, a retired couple from Portland and 2 women from Vancouver, and the group enjoyed wine and conversation until approximately 10:30 p.m. At 10:45 p.m., Ryan told the group he and Evan were going to walk around the deck to get some air before turning in for the night, and several people remembered the brothers leaving together through the starboard exit. The promenade deck wrapped around the entire ship at Deck 7, an outdoor walking area with railings on the ocean side and the ship's superstructure on the inner side, and it was a popular spot for evening strolls. Security cameras captured Ryan and Evan exiting onto the promenade deck at 10:47 p.m., walking toward the rear of the ship with Ryan's arm around his brother's shoulders in a gesture of brotherly affection. At 11:15 p.m., a passenger named George Henderson was taking an evening walk on the promenade deck and noticed 2 men's jackets draped over the railing near the stern, and he thought it odd that someone had left clothing outside. George picked up the jackets intending to turn them into lost and found, and he noticed a wallet in one pocket containing Ryan Dalton's ID and credit cards, which concerned him enough to immediately contact ship security. Security officer Maria Santos arrived at 11:25 p.m. and confirmed the jackets belonged to the Dalton brothers based on cabin records, and she immediately checked their cabin on Deck 9, finding the room empty with no signs of the brothers. An announcement requesting Ryan and Evan Dalton report to guest services was broadcast shipwide at 11:30 p.m., and when 20 minutes passed without response, Captain James Morrison was notified of potentially missing passengers. By 11:55 p.m., a full ship search was initiated with crew members checking all public areas, entertainment venues, restaurants, and bars, looking for 2 brothers who'd seemingly vanished during an evening walk. In approximately 1 hour, while taking a stroll on a cruise ship deck with 1,200 other passengers nearby, Ryan and Evan Dalton disappeared without anyone seeing or hearing what happened to them. If this mystery has captured your attention, make sure you're subscribed for more unsolved cases, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from or what theories you have. Now let's continue. Security reviewed camera footage from the promenade deck and confirmed that Ryan and Evan had walked toward the stern at 10:47 p.m., but the camera coverage in that area was limited, and the brothers walked out of frame at 10:49 p.m. No footage showed them returning from that direction or appearing anywhere else on the ship, and despite cameras positioned at various points, the brothers never appeared on any recording after walking toward the stern. Captain Morrison ordered the ship to reverse course and begin searching the water they'd passed through, and he contacted the U.S. Coast Guard to report 2 passengers potentially overboard. The ship's crew launched searchlights and scanned the dark Pacific waters, while passengers were asked to return to their cabins so crew could conduct a systematic search of every area of the vessel. Ryan and Evan's cabin was examined thoroughly, and investigators found their belongings neatly arranged with no signs of plans to leave the ship, and their passports and return flight tickets were in the room safe. The group they'd had dinner with was interviewed extensively, and all reported that the brothers had seemed happy and relaxed with no indication of distress or conflict, just 2 siblings enjoying a vacation together. By 1 a.m., Coast Guard helicopters and vessels had joined the search, scanning waters where the brothers might have gone overboard, but the dark night and vast ocean made finding anyone in the water nearly impossible. The ship remained in the search area throughout the night with passengers confined to interior areas, and crew members walked every deck calling the brothers' names, though nobody truly expected a response. By sunrise on September 23rd, it was clear that Ryan and Evan Dalton were not on the MS Pacific Star, and the grim reality settled that they'd either fallen or been pushed overboard during their evening walk. The Coast Guard search continued throughout Sunday with helicopters and vessels covering 100 square miles of Pacific Ocean, where the brothers might have gone into the water based on the ship's course and ocean currents. But searching for two people in the vast Pacific was like looking for needles in a haystack, especially when investigators didn't know exactly when or where they'd gone overboard, only that it had happened sometime after 10:47 p.m. Captain Morrison allowed the MS Pacific Star to continue to its scheduled port in Cabo San Lucas, where FBI agents and Mexican authorities boarded the ship to conduct a thorough investigation of what was now being treated as a potential double homicide. Special Agent Robert Chen led the FBI investigation and immediately focused on the security footage, trying to understand how two men could walk toward the stern of a cruise ship and simply never be seen again. The footage showed Ryan and Evan walking casually along the promenade deck, talking and laughing, showing no signs of distress or awareness that anything was wrong, and then they walked out of camera range at 10:49 p.m. The area near the stern where their jackets were found had limited camera coverage due to the configuration of the deck and positioning of equipment, creating a blind spot approximately 60 feet long where someone could be without being recorded. Agent Chen interviewed George Henderson extensively about finding the jackets, and George insisted they'd been draped carefully over the railing, not thrown or dropped haphazardly, suggesting someone had deliberately placed them there. They were folded over the rail like someone had taken them off because they were warm, George explained. Not crumpled or tossed aside, which is why I noticed them. They looked intentionally placed. This detail troubled investigators because if the brothers had simply fallen overboard accidentally, why would they have removed their jackets first and placed them so carefully on the railing? The railing at that section of the ship was 42 inches high, making it difficult though not impossible for someone to fall over accidentally, and there were no signs of struggle or damage to the railing itself. FBI forensic teams processed the jackets in the area where they'd been found, checking for blood evidence or signs of violence, but they found nothing unusual beyond the brothers' own DNA and fingerprints. Every passenger and crew member who'd been on the promenade deck between 10:00 p.m. and midnight was interviewed, asked if they'd seen the Dalton brothers or noticed anything unusual near the stern. A couple from Arizona reported seeing two men who might have been the brothers standing at the railing around 11:00 p.m., but they couldn't say definitively if it was Ryan and Evan, and they hadn't noticed anything concerning about the scene. They were just standing there looking at the ocean, the woman recalled. We walked past them and they seemed fine. Just two guys enjoying the view. Nothing that suggested anything was wrong. Agent Chen created a timeline based on witness statements and camera footage. The brothers left the gala at 10:45 p.m., appeared on camera at 10:47 p.m., walked out of frame at 10:49 p.m., and their jackets were found at 11:15 p.m. This left a window of approximately 26 minutes when something had happened to Ryan and Evan, and they'd either fallen, jumped, or been pushed overboard during that time frame. The theory that both brothers had jumped together in a suicide pact was considered, but their families vehemently rejected this possibility, insisting neither man had been depressed or suicidal. Ryan's fiancée, Catherine, was interviewed, and she confirmed that Ryan had been excited about their upcoming wedding and had no financial problems or personal issues that would make him want to end his life. Evan's girlfriend, Jennifer, said the same, that Evan had been happy and looking forward to upcoming photography assignments, and she'd spoken to him by ship phone earlier that day with no indication anything was wrong. The brothers' financial records were reviewed and showed no debts or problems. Their business dealings were legitimate and successful, and there was simply no motive for them to want to disappear or harm themselves. Agent Chen focused investigation on whether someone else had been on the stern deck with the brothers, someone who might have pushed them overboard or been involved in their disappearance. Crew members who'd been working that night were interviewed extensively, and their movements were tracked through keycard access records and duty logs, but everyone could account for their time and locations. One crew member named Thomas Parker raised brief suspicion because he'd been on break during the critical time window and had been seen near the promenade deck, but he had no connection to the brothers and no motive. Parker's background check revealed no criminal history, and he cooperated fully with investigators, providing a detailed account of his movements and passing a polygraph test about his involvement. The retired couple and two women who'd had dinner with the brothers were interviewed multiple times about the conversation that evening, whether the brothers had mentioned plans to meet anyone or go anywhere specific. They were talking about Ryan's wedding and Evan's photography business, one of the women recalled. Normal conversation, nothing that suggested they were planning anything unusual or that they were worried about anything. By the time the MS Pacific Star returned to San Francisco on September 24th, the investigation had produced no evidence of foul play, but also no explanation for how two healthy adult men had vanished from a cruise ship. The brothers' families arrived in San Francisco demanding answers, and they were devastated to learn that investigators had no solid leads, no witnesses to what had actually happened, and no bodies recovered from the Pacific. The media seized on the story of two brothers vanishing from a cruise ship, and by late September, the Dalton case was featured on national news broadcasts, with speculation about what might have happened during that evening walk. The carefully placed jackets became a focal point of analysis, with experts debating whether their positioning suggested suicide, accident, or foul play, and each theory had proponents, but none could be definitively proven. Ryan's fiancée Catherine appeared on Good Morning America pleading for information, insisting that Ryan would never have jumped overboard and leaving her without explanation, and she believed something terrible had been done to both brothers. "Ryan and I were planning our wedding for next June," Catherine said through tears. "He'd just put a deposit on our reception venue. We were looking at houses together. He had everything to live for. He wouldn't just jump off a ship." Evan's girlfriend Jennifer echoed these sentiments, describing Evan as passionate about his work and excited about upcoming projects, with no indication he'd been struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts. FBI behavioral analysts created a profile suggesting that if the brothers had gone overboard voluntarily, some triggering event must have occurred during their walk, something that made them both decide simultaneously to end their lives. But no evidence of such an event was found, no distressing phone calls or messages received, no confrontations with other passengers, nothing that would explain a sudden joint decision to jump. The theory that the brothers had been drinking heavily and had become reckless was investigated, but witnesses from dinner confirmed they'd had wine with the meal, but weren't intoxicated when they left the gala. Another theory suggested one brother had fallen accidentally, and the other had jumped in trying to save him, but this scenario struggled to explain why both jackets would be carefully placed on the railing. The possibility that someone had murdered both brothers and disposed of their bodies overboard was explored extensively, with investigators looking for anyone who might have had motive to harm Ryan or Evan. But both brothers had clean backgrounds with no known enemies, no business disputes that had turned violent, no romantic entanglements that might provoke jealousy or rage from a third party. Detective work focused on other passengers who'd been on the cruise, particularly any who'd shown unusual interest in the brothers or had been seen near the stern during the critical time window. One passenger named Derek Walsh was investigated because other guests reported he'd been asking questions about the brothers after their disappearance, but he explained he'd been concerned and curious like everyone else. Walsh's background check revealed no criminal history and no connection to the Dalton brothers before the cruise, and he was eventually cleared as having no involvement in their disappearance. By November, the case had gone cold, with investigators acknowledging they might never know exactly what happened unless bodies were recovered or someone came forward with information. The Dalton family hired maritime lawyers and private investigators to conduct independent reviews of the case, hoping fresh eyes might spot something FBI agents had missed. The private investigators produced a detailed report identifying several areas where ship security could be improved, but offered no new insights into what had specifically happened to Ryan and Evan that night. Ryan's father, Michael, became convinced his sons had been murdered by someone on the ship, possibly a crew member or passenger who'd followed them to the stern, and he spent years trying to identify suspects. But without physical evidence or witnesses, Michael's theories remained speculation, and every person he investigated had alibis or could be cleared through other means, leaving him frustrated and grief-stricken. Evan's mother, Linda, developed severe depression and was hospitalized several times in the months after the disappearance, unable to cope with losing her son under such mysterious circumstances. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1986, and the broadcast generated hundreds of tips from viewers who thought they'd seen the brothers or had theories about what happened, but investigation revealed nothing credible. One particularly troubling tip came from a psychic who claimed to have visions of the brothers being held captive somewhere, but investigation found no evidence supporting this, and it was dismissed as someone seeking attention. The cruise line faced a wrongful death lawsuit from the Dalton family, alleging inadequate security and negligent supervision of passenger areas, and the case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. MS Pacific Star implemented additional security cameras and increased patrols of outdoor deck areas at night, changes directly inspired by the Dalton disappearance, though they came too late to help Ryan and Evan. Some investigators theorized that the brothers had staged their own disappearance for unknown reasons, perhaps to escape debts or legal troubles, but exhaustive background checks found no evidence supporting this theory. Ryan's business was examined thoroughly and found to be financially sound with no hidden debts, and Evan's freelance work was legitimate with no concerning associations or activities. By 1990, the active investigation had been suspended, with the case remaining open, but no detectives assigned to work it full-time, and the Dalton brothers became another unsolved maritime mystery. The carefully placed jackets remained in FBI evidence storage, the only physical items recovered from that September evening, silent witnesses to whatever had happened on the stern of the MS Pacific Star. The years accumulated slowly for the Dalton family, with 1984 becoming 1995 and then 2005, and the bedroom Ryan had grown up in remained untouched in his parents' Seattle home, a shrine to a son who'd vanished at sea. Catherine never married and kept Ryan's engagement ring in a box beside her bed for the rest of her life, unable to move forward from a relationship that had ended so abruptly and mysteriously on a Pacific cruise ship. Jennifer eventually married someone else but told friends she never fully recovered from losing Evan, and she kept his photography portfolio in her home office as a reminder of the talented man who'd disappeared. Michael Dalton spent years researching maritime disappearances and advocating for better safety regulations on cruise ships, channeling his grief into activism that might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. He testified before Congress in 1995 about the need for improved security camera coverage on cruise ships and mandatory protocols for investigating overboard incidents, and some of his recommendations were eventually adopted industry-wide. Linda Dalton died in 2003 at age 68 from cancer that doctors believed had been exacerbated by decades of stress and unresolved grief over losing Evan without answers. Detective James Morrison took over the cold case in 2008 when he joined the FBI, and he approached it with modern investigative tools, including enhanced video analysis technology that hadn't existed in 1984. Morrison used sophisticated software to enhance the security footage from the promenade deck, attempting to extract more details about the brothers' final visible moments and whether anyone else had been nearby. The enhanced footage revealed nothing new beyond confirming that Ryan and Evan had been alone when they walked out of camera range, laughing and appearing relaxed with no indication they were about to disappear forever. Morrison also investigated whether the brothers could have climbed over the railing and descended to a lower deck, or accessed a restricted area, but architectural analysis of the ship showed this would have been nearly impossible. By 2015, Ryan would have been 63 and Evan would have been 59, ages that made their families imagine the lives they would have lived, the careers they would have built, the families they might have raised. True crime podcasts discovered the Dalton case in the 2010s, and several shows featured detailed episodes analyzing the evidence and proposing theories that ranged from plausible to fantastical. Some podcasters suggested the brothers had been pushed by someone who'd followed them to the stern, specifically because that area had limited camera coverage, a premeditated crime by someone who understood the ship's security blind spots. Others believed the brothers had witnessed something criminal on the ship, perhaps drug smuggling or trafficking, and had been eliminated by people who couldn't risk them reporting what they'd seen. But investigators found no evidence of criminal activity on the MS Pacific Star during that cruise, and crew members who'd worked that voyage all had clean backgrounds with no connections to organized crime. The theory that gained most traction among investigators was that one brother had somehow gone overboard accidentally, perhaps leaning too far over the railing to take a photo, and the other had jumped in attempting a rescue. This scenario would explain why both jackets were on the railing, removed so the brothers could swim more easily, and why no one heard screams or sounds of struggle that would accompany a violent crime. But this theory struggled to explain why experienced swimmers would remove jackets before jumping into dark ocean waters, rather than using them as flotation devices, and why no distress calls or shouts had been heard by anyone. Maritime safety experts weighed in with analysis showing that falling from a cruise ship deck at night offered virtually no chance of survival, even for strong swimmers, due to the ship's movement, cold water, and impossibility of being located in darkness. Michael Dalton hired oceanographers in 2012 to model where bodies would have drifted based on currents from September 1984, and the analysis suggested remains could have traveled hundreds of miles in various directions. This meant that if Ryan and Evan had gone into the water, their bodies could be anywhere in a vast area of Pacific Ocean, and the chances of recovery after nearly 30 years were essentially zero. By 2020, advances in satellite imaging and underwater scanning technology offered new possibilities, and researchers used historical satellite data to see if anything unusual appeared in waters near the ship's route on September 22, 1984. But the satellite resolution from that era was too poor to detect objects as small as human bodies, and the effort yielded no useful information about what might have happened to the brothers. Detective Morrison retired from the FBI in 2022, but kept copies of the Dalton case file, and he occasionally reviewed it hoping that some new technology or witness might finally provide answers after nearly 40 years. Michael Dalton died in 2023 at age 89, having spent 39 years investigating his son's disappearance without finding definitive answers about what happened on that cruise ship deck. His final wishes included a request that his ashes be scattered in the Pacific Ocean, near where the MS Pacific Star had been sailing on September 22, 1984, so he could be close to where his sons had disappeared. The MS Pacific Star was sold and refitted in 1998, then eventually scrapped in 2015, and during the dismantling process, workers were asked to watch for anything that might be connected to the Dalton case, but nothing was found. Former passengers and crew members occasionally post online about their memories of that cruise, and the morning when everyone learned two brothers had vanished, describing the shock and fear that had spread through the ship. Some report that after the Dalton disappearance, they never felt safe on cruise ships again, haunted by the idea that people could simply vanish from decks with hundreds of others nearby and nobody would see or hear what happened. By 2024, the disappearance of Ryan and Evan Dalton has become one of the most discussed unsolved maritime mysteries, analyzed by experts trying to understand how two brothers could vanish from a cruise ship without a single witness. The image of their carefully placed jackets draped over the railing has been shared millions of times across social media, a haunting visual representation of a mystery that 40 years of investigation has failed to solve. Catherine, Ryan's former fiancée, is now in her 70s and living in Oregon, and she told a documentary filmmaker in 2023 that she still dreams about Ryan and wakes up expecting him to call like he used to. "I've lived an entire lifetime without him," Catherine said. "I've had a career, traveled the world, watched my friends have families, and through it all, I've wondered what our life together would have been like if that cruise had ended differently." Jennifer, Evan's former girlfriend, maintains a website featuring his photography work and documenting his disappearance, ensuring that his artistic legacy isn't forgotten, even though his life was cut short at 28. The FBI maintains the Dalton case in their cold case database, and information is cross-referenced whenever bodies are discovered at sea, or when similar disappearances occur on cruise ships anywhere in the world. But 40 years have passed without any physical evidence emerging from the Pacific Ocean. No remains washing ashore, no personal items found floating, nothing that could definitively prove what happened to the brothers. Detective Morrison believes the truth died with Ryan and Evan on that September night in 1984, and unless someone who was on the ship comes forward with information they've kept hidden, the case will never be solved. "The ocean is the perfect place to commit a crime or have an accident," Morrison explains. "No crime scene to process, no witnesses if you choose your moment carefully, and currents that carry evidence away forever." The theory that both brothers went overboard voluntarily in a suicide pact has been largely abandoned by investigators because neither man had any indication of suicidal ideation, and the careful placement of jackets suggests they expected to retrieve them. The accident theory remains plausible, but struggles with the question of why both brothers would go over, and why no one heard their calls for help, as the ship sailed away from them in the darkness. The murder theory has the fewest supporters because no motive was ever established, no suspects identified, and no evidence of violence found, though some investigators believe this explanation remains possible. Cruise ship safety has evolved significantly since 1984, with modern vessels featuring comprehensive camera coverage, motion sensors on railings, and man-overboard detection systems that would have alerted crew immediately if someone went into the water. These improvements have prevented some tragedies and helped solve others, but they came too late for Ryan and Evan Dalton, whose disappearance occurred in an era when cruise ship security was far less sophisticated. The case has inspired changes to how cruise lines investigate overboard incidents and how they preserve evidence in the critical hours after someone goes missing, reforms that bear the Dalton name in maritime safety circles. True crime communities continue to debate the case online, proposing elaborate theories and analyzing every frame of available footage, but internet speculation cannot create evidence that doesn't exist or solve mysteries the ocean has swallowed. Some amateur investigators believe a crew member was involved, and the cruise line covered it up to avoid liability, but exhaustive investigation found no evidence supporting conspiracy theories, only tragic circumstances and unanswered questions. The most likely explanation remains that something happened during those 26 minutes when the brothers were out of camera range, something that resulted in both going overboard either together or in quick succession. Whether this was accident, suicide, murder, or some combination that investigators haven't considered remains unknown, and the Pacific Ocean keeps whatever secrets it holds about that September night. The stretch of Pacific where the MS Pacific Star was sailing on September 22, 1984, continues to be traveled by cruise ships and cargo vessels, and most passengers have no idea they're passing through waters where two brothers disappeared. Michael Dalton's ashes were scattered in that area in 2023 as he'd requested, and Catherine and Jennifer attended the ceremony, 3 people bound together by loving men who vanished at sea 40 years earlier. "We're putting you to rest where your sons were lost," the minister said during the ceremony. "May you finally find peace together in the waters that took them from us." The case stands as a reminder that even on vessels with hundreds of people and modern safety features, individuals can vanish so completely that decades of investigation cannot determine what happened to them. And it highlights the unique challenges of investigating crimes or accidents at sea, where evidence disappears into the depths and witnesses may not realize they saw something important until it's too late. The security footage of Ryan and Evan walking along the promenade deck at 10:47 p.m., brotherly and content, represents the last confirmed sighting of 2 men who would be gone within minutes and never seen again. And somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean or in memories someone has kept hidden for 40 years, or in a place no investigator has yet considered, the answer to what happened to the Dalton brothers may still exist. But until that answer emerges, if it ever does, Ryan and Evan remain lost at sea. Their disappearance an enduring mystery that challenges our understanding of how completely people can vanish from places they should have been safe. The memorial website dedicated to the brothers shows them smiling in family photos from before the cruise, 2 successful young men enjoying life with no idea that a vacation would end in circumstances no one could explain. And every September 22nd, Catherine lights 2 candles in her Oregon home and looks at photos of Ryan, talking to him as if he might somehow hear her across the decades and the ocean. "I never stopped loving you," she whispers to his image. "I never stopped wondering what happened on that deck, and I never stopped hoping that someday we'd know the truth, even though that day may never come." But the Pacific offers no answers. The security footage shows only empty deck space, and the mystery of what happened to Ryan and Evan Dalton during a night sailing in 1984 remains unsolved to this day. The jackets carefully placed on the railing sit in an FBI evidence warehouse, preserved as the only physical items recovered from that evening, silent witnesses to a mystery that has outlasted everyone who searched for answers. And in the hearts of people who knew them, Ryan and Evan Dalton exist as both real people who lived and loved and had dreams for the future, and as symbols of how the ocean can take without explanation and keep its secrets forever. The question of what happened during those 26 minutes on the stern of the MS Pacific Star remains one of maritime history's most baffling unanswered mysteries, a case that may never be resolved no matter how much time passes.